Of knowledge. The democratization of knowledge. A special Ake welcome. Please give to our guest. Special Ake welcome Elias to our guest. Wondimu. Elias Petina Gappah and Petina Gappah and Mkuki and our host Angela Wachuka.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you bright and early this morning. Bright faces in the audience. Thank you for coming. My name is Angela Wachuka, and I welcome you to my panel discussion with, to my right, immediately, Elias Wondimu, Petina Gappah, and Mkuki Bgoya. And thank you for that welcome. I just found out that that voice is Ola. Thank you for that warm welcome. We're going to jump right in. We have 58 minutes to go. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We've had the benefit of listening to so many presentations in the past few days. And so we will be talking about knowledge gaps, successes, the experiences that my panelists have had. Hopefully we'll also be very candid about some failures as well, and some learning opportunities that we've had. So I'm going to begin with you, Elias. If any of you have had an opportunity to look at his bio, Elias has had such a long career in publishing in general, but also as a journalist. He wears so many different hats. Lots of experiences in publishing, spanning academic journals to setting up children's imprint, and even an imprint not too long ago for self-publishing. One of the conversations, Elias, that we were having was about the state of academic publishing. So let's take a hypothetical. I'm a young researcher from any African country, a young up-and-coming academic with very exciting ideas that I want to share with the world, and specifically with Africa. What are my avenues?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ake. This is my second and first in person. And Lola is a force to reckon with in this arena. And to bring all of us in one space is amazing. And this is the first time I have attended so many book festivals, book conferences, African studies conferences. This is the first time I have become the part of the majority, and I couldn't tell you what it feels.
That's amazing.
The scenario you created is, I think, if anyone, any scholar, young or emerging scholar, I should say, if that scholar wants to be successful in globally, if he wants fellowship, if he needs funding, if he needs to travel around the world, he needs to be published by the major American or European publishers. For that, he has to travel to these major conferences that exist. And what I attend these conferences, so what really saddens me is that you see all these African scholars lining up with their manuscripts, trying to pitch from one table to another. These are all Western publishers. And you can see the trepidation and the anxiety, and when they are received by these publishers, how they relieve the sigh, because it's their survival, it's their success or failure. And so, but in that equation, Africa is missing. I have been lucky enough to play in that space, but it has been a very difficult one. And the success that Sahai could profess to is surviving for 25 years. This is our 25 years, and we, since when Howard University Press closed in 2011, Sahai became the only African publisher or black publisher in any American, European, or Asian universities. And that's a shocking reality for myself, let alone for anybody else. We are not in any power position in this industry, and we have to change that. the best way to go about it is that, as you know, you can't blame this emerging scholar not to be able to go to an African publisher and give it. That's the global system that we live in. We have to democratize it. To democratize meaning that we have to pull we have to create institutions that compete in that level. Yes, the others have a couple of hundred years of advantage, but at the same time, we have to start from the bottom. We have to grow through the process. And in the part of maybe the conversations later on, talk about how we can do that so that knowledge is democratized in our continent.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for setting that context, Elias. I will return to you with questions about particular efforts across the continent that are addressing that challenge. But in the meantime, Petina, good morning. That was a great segue, I think, Petina, for you to speak about. You were in Nairobi recently for the NBO Lit Fest, and one of the conversations that we had was actually a podcast. And since then, I think you've talked about, in that particular podcast, we're talking about the research that you have done for your latest novel, Out of Darkness, Shining Light. And when we got to Ake, you said that one of the outcomes from that conversations is you going into a podcast recording series that you're going to establish. Could you talk a little bit about how, at a granular level, that democratizes access to the work that you have produced?
Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you so much, Angela. It's such a pleasure to be on this panel with Elias and with Mkuki. And what you didn't say, Angela, is that the festival I attended in Nairobi is the first festival I haven't done, that I have done since, I think, before the pandemic. But I said yes to it because it's a festival run by a library. I love libraries. And I think libraries as a source of knowledge generation this is one of the biggest passions of my life. And in our conversation, you and Shiro told me something that just blew my mind. Where's Shiro? She's over there somewhere. She really is a Shiro, right? And what blew my mind was that these ladies were going into the archives of the Macmillan Library and finding stories and then sharing them, right? So this is how they were bringing the past back. So I'd much rather talk about what you're doing than what I hope to do, because mine is simply, I'm piggybacking on your idea. I believe very strongly that the best ideas should be copied, should be replicated. That's how we spread knowledge. But I think that the idea of digging into the past to remind us, one, that there's nothing new under the sun, as the book of Ecclesiastes so beautifully says. And two, that humans are humans in whatever time they lived in, and that we share this connection with those who've lived before and those who are to come after us. So I think using technology, using technology helps us connect with that past and pass on, that knowledge that might otherwise only be accessible if you go to the archives.
And since we're talking about libraries, that was going to be my next question to you, but I'm going to have you answer it now. You have quite a special relationship with libraries. I think in your panel with Kina, you talked about how Heaven is a Library, which is your upcoming memoir, grew from this desire, I think, to share stories with your nephew, correct? Babajide? Yes. And we've had many, many conversations about the experiences you've had in libraries. Could you talk to us a little bit and to the audience about how libraries for you specifically have bridged things as a writer?
Okay, so libraries, because I live in libraries and I lived in libraries as a child and as a young adult. So libraries are places where things happen to me. So for instance, one boyfriend had to hunt me down in the law library in order to dump me outside it. So there's that, right? On the bright side, I ended up writing a beautiful short story about it. So don't cry for me, oh Ake. but certainly libraries are really where I've lived. I think the most beautiful moments of my life. I'm reading this lovely book that I want to share with you by Emma Smith, who quotes from, she gets the title from a wonderful memoir by Stephen King, by the way, that everyone should read. That's the reason I became a writer. On Writing by Stephen King, Magic. And Stephen King calls books portable magic, right? It's magic that you can carry, right? So the idea of portable magic that you can borrow and return. You know, when you open a library book, you know, the old-fashioned ones, and they have the dates, you know, it was last borrowed in 1976, and you're the first person to pick it up. I just really love libraries. So my childhood library, the Queen Victoria Memorial Library, the library that introduced me to books, was in ruins when I moved back to Zimbabwe in 2011. And because it's a historic building that won some major prize in the Commonwealth between the wars, blah, 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 it needed a lot of money to restore it. So I thought, hang on, I want other children to have the same, you know, gift of portable magic that I had. So I asked how much it would take to restore it. I was told it's $1 million, and I said, done, right? So I raised $1 million, mainly from the Swedish embassy.
You like that. You like that a lot.
You know what, I'm so good at raising money for other people. For myself, not so much. Right, so yeah, so now that library is a living space. You know, people have concerts in it. And what makes it so beautiful is that we now have the complete collection of Zimbabwe's Nobel laureates. Call her British, we don't care, she's Zimbabwean, and her name is Doris Lessing. So we have the Doris Lessing collection on one wall, and then Charles Mungoshi, a Zimbabwean writer, has his own wall. And there's a wall that has been reserved for what I hope will be the Petina Gappah collection when I die.
Yeah. I love everything about that. Everything. And we've noted the ability to raise money for other people and the $1 million figure. Yes? Speaking of Nobel laureates, I'm going to come to you now, Mkuki. Obviously, running a publishing house that was set up by your father in 1981, so been around for a while, 42 years. And on this point of Nobel laureates, Abdulrazak Guna, his book Paradise, I believe your publishing house translated into Kiswahili. You're about to translate Petina Gappah's Out of Darkness, Shining Light. You're about to translate The Secret Lives of Baba Shegi's Wives by Lola Shonein. There's Ngugi wa Thiong'o's epic poem, Kedamu Yuru. Dr. Rangimoto?
From Kikuyu
From
to Kiswahili.
Kikuyu to Kiswahili. Not from English, from Kikuyu to Kiswahili, which is quite a special thing of not having to use English as a medium. How have translations driven your engagement with your primary audience? Because your primary audience are reading in Kiswahili.
Yes, thank you. So Tanzania is 60 million people. 99% of those people read and speak Kiswahili on their daily lives. And Kiswahili is spoken and read by over 200 million people. So that's sort of the context in which we work in. So the last part of your question, how has it been received? Well, Tanzania is interesting because even though English is an official language, it's really a language of a minority elites. Yet its hegemony has forced us to constantly refer to it. And as a result, it keeps everybody out from accessing literature, from accessing knowledge, from accessing ourselves. So what we do at Mkinanyota, as part of this, continuing this legacy, as you've spoken, I'm second generation publisher, is to try to now bring our stories into Kiswahili so that our people can be able to really access these stories. For example, you spoke about Abdulrazak. Abdulrazak has been writing in English for the last 40-some years. Yet, when he was announced as the Nobel winner, the first question in us being publishers, you're getting calls from different news, media houses from outside Tanzania and within, and the very first question is, how come we hear nobody knows about this person? And that is heartbreaking because I want to celebrate, That's my first reaction, is to celebrate, it's joy. And yet I'm constantly having to feel this question, how come people don't know him at home? Because that's his homeland, right? And because we're in Tanzania, I know why. Because he's not accessible, The few, who can read and write English may have read him, but they are insignificant in terms of him being understood. Even in government and like all these, places where they would have been making a marketing thing about his win, for Tanzania. So, so that's the reality we deal with. But it also goes beyond just accessing, but it also goes to Tanzanians have this complex, we feel somehow inadequate when we can't read or speak English. I'll give you an example. Like here, as I sit, English is my second language. I would have been more comfortable having this panel in Kiswahili. I would have been very, very comfortable if I was speaking Kiswahili. And so I'm thinking, okay, like what is my challenge as a second generation publisher? How do I sort of carry this forward? And for me, I'm like, maybe what we need to do now is figure out how to make tools, that, and this is where this question of translation from African languages to another. If, for example, we're building an AI system for us, and we're feeding it data in Kikuyu, in Luo, in Yoruba, in Kiswahili, because it's not simply a matter of translation, it's also a matter of building an intelligent technology which can be able to synthesize all of this knowledge from across our continent. And so next time, in a few years, I could speak Kiswahili here, you could speak Shona, you could speak Amharic, you could speak, I don't know if you know Kikuyu, Kiswahili, and all of you guys could be wearing headphones, and this AI would be translating in your own individual languages. Just imagine how powerful of an idea that could possibly be. That then I don't have to worry about language when I'm writing. I just write in the language I dream in, the language I imagine in, knowing that all of you guys will understand in the language you dream and you imagine in. So that's kind of what we're trying to, hopefully, as we go forward, that's the kind of publishing I would like to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mkuki. And speaking of languages, I don't know if Tabiso Mulape is in the room, but at some point, and I was having this discussion with Lola, we were having a discussion about languages, publishing in African languages, and whether demand drives supply. And for you, Petina, I know that there's been the translation of Animal Farm into Shona and working on a novel in Shona. What's been your experience around writing in Shona specifically?
So before I answer that question, can I just say my favorite thing about Swahili? Right, my favorite thing about Swahili is that it's this East African language, right? It's not just a Tanzanian language, but it's different depending on the country. And in fact, they say Tanzania, Kiswahili was born very healthy and beautiful. It was a healthy baby born in Tanzania. And then it fell sick in Uganda.
I'm already offended, Petina. I know where you're going.
It fell sick in Uganda, and then it died in Kenya. And then it was buried in Rwanda. more serious issues, right? I write in Shona, Angela, because I used to have these, very heated conversations with African writers about putting italics, putting Shona in italics and Ndebele in italics, Swahili in italics when you write in English. And it seemed to be this big affront. And I just thought it's a question of punctuation. You're helping the reader to recognize that it's a different language. It's not to say that the italicized language is inferior. And then when I did Animal Farm, I put English words in italics, right? And I'm writing a book called Mount Pleasant, which has a lot of German and Italian, and I put those languages in italics. It's just a function of, saying to the reader, this is different. But it got me thinking about what I call the dignity of language, right? That we assume that there are languages that are universal, that there are languages that are spoken and understood through which the human condition is expressed. Why are those languages not our languages, right? Why don't we translate from Shakespeare to Shona, to Swahili, to Kikuyu, to Amharic, and so on? And that for me was the reason for it. The economics of it, that will come in time. For me, it's not just about getting people to buy the books. It's just about making the books available. So you'll find that our Animal Farm translation is in every library in Zimbabwe right now, right? And I think we've probably sold, I don't know if we've sold 1,000 copies, we've done a lot, right? But for me, it's not about people buying the book so much as the book being available, right? Even if it's available for posterity, sorry to be so pompous about it, but we have to start somewhere. And even if it's just, 20 people buying Abdurrahman Gana in Swahili, I think that's a start, because at least availability is the start. Yeah.
And on to you, Elias. You have produced a massive amount of work, I think, in both English and Amharic. There's been a lot of, I think, Ethiopia-facing work as well over the years. How does the rest of the continent access it?
That's the elephant in the room. That's the major issue. Not only how the continent gets it, how could Ethiopia get its own books? My life is a little bit, I was a journalist, and I was a journalist in exile for 24 years. It's just only the last 5 years that I was trying to go back and forth in Ethiopia for the first time. Being in exile and not being able to produce my books in Ethiopia was a big challenge. And now after I returned, the challenge didn't stop. It continues. It takes different phases, but the challenge is still there. Through translations, especially African language translations, our stories need to be shared and talked about. Normally in this kind of settings where English is the main medium, you don't see a lot of Ethiopian writers. It's not that we don't have literature, but our writers don't write in English, except those who live in expatriate outside the country. So one of the things that needs to happen is that we have to create an institution that will teach proper translations so that we can translate our work for the international market, so that our brothers across the border, across the ocean could know about us. That's the only way that we can do that. When we go back to the libraries, what's happening in many of the libraries around the continent is that there's books from Europe and America, second-hand books, withdrawn books from the libraries, filled these containers and found in our shores and fill our libraries. I remember when I was, I think, 9th grade, a huge container arrived in our school. And the books came and literally filled the entire library, any space they had. They had to break the walls and put shelves and put maybe 2 double classrooms, and the library became so big, which is fantastic. The problem was that my classmates could only use maybe 2% of the entire collection that came. And when you read the stories, this continues to happen even now, when you read the stories, they had nothing to do with you. And so how, imagine, now I'm working with companies who send books to Africa, and I talk to them usually, and I said, how much do you spend to ship it? And the amount they tell me, if they spend that amount of money, we can produce books in our own languages. We can be able to pay the author, we can pay the translator, we can be able to pay the printers. So I think we have to change the modalities. That's how we can democratize knowledge in our own continent. And I think that has to be something that 2063, I think the AU agenda is coming, and African Union is talking about it. But I think indigenizing our own knowledge is important, and I think it has to be a part of the conversations that we need to take.
Just jump in there, because that's such a powerful point, Elias. You know, I don't know if people know this, Mkuki, you too, but what was the most translated novel into almost every African language at the turn of the last century? Does anybody know what it's called? It's called The Pilgrim's Progress. It's The Pilgrim's Progress because it was the gateway to Christianity. Before the Bible was translated widely, you had this lovely novel about Christian going to the celestial city. It was abridged and translated. The Banyan Library in the UK has Pilgrim's Progress in Yoruba, in Igbo, in Hausa, in Swahili. It's all over, right? And to your point, Elias, right? We need to take back that power, right? And use the same tools. We need to, as Audre Lorde says, use the master's tools to break down the master's house. We need to use the tool of translation to reclaim those narratives. And I think what you say, I'd never actually thought about it. Instead of getting the books shipped over, use the shipping costs to support the publishing industry in Africa. Yeah.
I mean, if I can, yeah. If you have these conversations, I think with Book Aid, I've had this conversation with Book Aid, it's never really going anywhere.
Oh, really?
Yes, I mean, I can just say this publicly, because you go into Tanganyika Library in Dar es Salaam, you see boxes and boxes of Book Aid. And it's the same question. Like, you have a publishing industry that is struggling, and then you bring all these books and dump them there, you know, when we are trying to create new works, go back into history, bring these, and so we need to really like challenge them, because it's another way of kind of pushing out our narratives within our own spaces, actually, this time. So,
Mkuki, you are telling them to literally fire yourself from your job, so they're not going to do it. So that's another point. Let me add something else. From the US, I print in many parts of the world. Wherever it's cheaper, the quality is good, I go. So I remember the first time I went to China, first we had this communication via email, and an American publisher is coming to you. That's how they perceived me. So, and who is an African? An American publisher who is an African. So I remember this particular printer, most of them did this. So they had tables out, welcome Elias Wondimu and the Thai publisher on their door. So they take you through all this, and later on a big dinner. Of course, they're trying to access your business. And I remember most of them had these African titles that they have published, because I told them my interest and where some of the books would go to Africa. And I remember one particular publisher getting all these books, and I'm fascinated, and I'm looking. This is a French book. And I remember the image in the book, the caricature in the book were very, very colonial, racist. I said, when did you publish this? He said, recently. To whom? To some French-speaking country in the continent. And I remember saying, how on earth, who funded this? Who did this? And I think a Canadian-French company funded it. And I couldn't remember. I couldn't really think properly. I was so mad. And I remember I went back to the copyright pages. The book originally is published in 1950s. Now it's published for free distribution in educational system in this francophone country in Africa. What is you understand what's happening? It's not about just only books that have been in the shelves for many years, but even new books are being produced and sent to the continent. And we can't even print our own local textbooks. We have to send it out. We have to farm it out to other countries. So I think the ecosystem has failed us. and the colonial powers who controlled our narrative for over 600 years old, since the inception of the Gutenberg printing presses, have perpetuated that storytelling. And the last 60 years is not serving us. We're not really using the last 60 years for liberating our stories. So I think we have to go back to that understanding that, yes, we are now decolonized. We have other problems. But at the same time, we have to find to liberate our stories. The only way that we can liberate our stories is that when we control the translation, the editing, the writing, and also the production and distribution mechanisms in which that we knowledge transfer around the world.
Thank you.
I have a question for you, Angela.
Do you?
I think you should participate in this.
Do you?
No, I do. Because this is such a powerful point. But what about our governments?
Yes.
What kind of support are we getting from them? Because your festival in Nairobi and Ake are the only two festivals that I know of on the continent where the government is actually, it is here, the state government, the governor was, wonderfully represented here yesterday. And I know that Macmillan has been supported by the government, right? By the Ministry of, I don't know, that's why I'm asking. And Mkuki, I mean, he is publishing royalty, by the way. He's a very bashful young man.
Absolutely.
But he's publishing royalty. His father, Walter, I mean, he is the, industry titan in East Africa. But I'm wondering whether he received any support from the government or whether you are also now receiving that support.
No support. When we say independent, the government is part of independent of the government as well. But I think it's really we have this word in Kiswahili says uenda wazimu, like a kind of craziness that makes one survive being a publisher. It cannot be logical. It just cannot be logical. Because if it was, you definitely would find something else that makes more sense to do. And even I ask myself, I'm young, I have hopefully a few years ahead of me. What am I doing in this? Right? Yet at the same time, I can't get out of it because what else would I be doing anyway? Because this is the thing that really, but in Tanzania, in the last 2 years, we've been lucky that there's been a Minister of Education who's been very progressive, very much into literature and into supporting literature. And the government now has founded a literary prize for Kiswahili. And it's open to anyone. You don't have to be Tanzanian to submit your work. So that is definitely support, at least at a wider scale, not necessarily to a particular publishing house. What we're advocating, and could be a kind of support, is for government to rehabilitate libraries. Libraries again come in, because I think only the government really will have the kind of financial resources. I mean, Tanzania is a huge landmass, to really be able to rehabilitate libraries, to build new libraries, and then hopefully create programs where they can buy the books and stock them in libraries. And that's a way that you can support a publishing industry, you can support writers, so those are but there hasn't been really any direct, and this is just on and off, if every country has their, some countries it's just simply no any kind of support, but yes, I mean, without the governments, this, it's going to be a much longer and harder battle to fight.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Petina. It reminded me of what I think it was Kina Likimani said, was it yesterday, about if you looking to make money, you go into the production of educational content. Yeah. And I think it's the same in each publishing ecology across Africa. If you want to make cash, that's what you produce. And the idea, the context I think she was providing was that in an ideal world, that would then provide you with funding to then support other things. Mkuki, you mentioned prizes, and it reminded me of a star writer, one of yours actually, published by Mkuki Nanyota, called Dr. Rangimoto. who was also in Nairobi not too long ago and was very popular, writing in Kiswahili, lovely novel, winner of something called the Mabati Cornell Prize for Kiswahili. And I think one of the outputs of that prize is that they get publication with Mkuki. Could you talk a little bit about that kind of relationship and how that advances publishing and the ecology in general?
Yes. In the case of Mabati Cornell, so we have a partnership with them where we're the publishing partner. They don't necessarily fund the publishing part of it, but what they do is they help us find manuscripts in a sense that it's a prize, right? You know, so you have good manuscripts. So it helps for the publishing house to get. It's a kind of way because going through manuscripts, many manuscripts, is very hard, you know, and you know, for a small house. So that kind of helps in a way to get good manuscripts for us to have a chance to consider, and but also publicizing works. That's another way that it really helps, and it also encourages writers because there's something, you know, especially because it's in Kiswahili. You know, there are not that many avenues. And you mentioned Doto. Doto is actually very interesting because he won the top prize for both poetry in 1 year and a novel for another. So so you really have a chance to see and read amazing works in Kiswahili. And something that we were talking to Shiro earlier, I just remembered. Somebody mentioned something about trauma books in the previous, and it just made me think, you know, in Kiswahili we don't have trauma books. We don't have trauma books in Kiswahili. We just have books, and I think that, but and from Tanzanians, like when Tanzanians write works in English, you find trauma books, but never in Kiswahili. And I was like, wow, that must mean something. It must mean when we write in our language, we write about everything. You know, there is comedy, there is love, there is sex, there is, you know, just joy. And yes, there's suffering, there is grief, but like a whole range of our humanity when we write in our languages. And I think, I mean, that just really, it tells me this is really something to fight for. Because otherwise then it feels performative when we do it in English. And this, I can only speak for Tanzania. It often feels performative. You know, like there's some audience out there, an imagined audience that you need to write for, and your characters have to go through certain experiences for these works to resonate to this idea of an audience. And then when you write in Kiswahili, first and foremost, you write your story. You write for yourself and your people, and you're not trying to perform for anyone. And I think that is, I'm curious if that happens in Yoruba. You know, I'm just curious if, like, I would really like to hear what people think, because I'd never thought about that until that trauma books comment came up. I was like, what? Yes.
This sounds like a sidebar, a very enriching one. I think we should have a complete discussion about trauma in Kiswahili. Elias, I know you wanted to respond to that.
Yes, I think most of our writers, as we have seen on the stage the last few days, most of them are published outside the continent. And especially some of you who are first-time authors, you're going to face something that I'm about to explain. For example, a very known African writer, a good friend of mine, published with one of the top tier 1 publishers. And the next thing, when the book really did well, won some awards, and then he toiled on his second book. And I remember he was so relieved when he sent back to his editor the new novel. And the editor called him back. He said, no, we want a book similar to the first one, not this new one that shows Africa in a very delightful way. And what they were really seeking to get out of him was the trauma book. Right. Because the first book is a trauma book. And so what are we doing by perpetually, so if the editors, that's the point that I was trying to make earlier, that the editors, the publishers are not, they don't have a clue what our story is, what our culture has. And so they perpetually, because of the power they hold in their hands, they perpetually create this very sad Africa, the very stereotypical, perpetually, you don't see life in those stories. Always stories of distraction, stereotype, it repeats the stereotype that I was talking about that was perpetually done in the past 600 years. So how can we take that and create a new narrative? That's just to be able to create indigenous African publishing. By empowering that, that's the only way we can be able to. An African institution that creates an African story devoid of, we just wake up in the morning and want to have a good day and procreate and live life as the fullest as anybody does outside.
Yeah.
And so we need to do that.
I feel like this conversation can obviously go on for quite a long time, but I've got my cue to start our Q&A. So I'd like to turn over to the audience. I see one hand up here in the front, Latoya. And as Latoya is getting her question ready, I'm going to kick us off on the Q&A with talking about accessibility. A question to all the publishers and authors in the house about your work being available in Braille. Hands up. 1, 2, 3. It's something to really think about, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we were involved in a project recently where we were looking at the amount of text available in Braille across public libraries in Kenya, and we found that there was such a dire lack of writing by African authors and authors from the diaspora in particular. And what we ended up doing with that is producing texts, 10 of them, by authors from Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa. Something called the Marrakesh Treaty is really worth looking at because it allows the non-profit production of work in Braille. It's really, really something to think about in terms of democratizing access to knowledge and filling some fundamental knowledge gaps. Latoya, please.
So, Angela, I'm going to go to my question, but just to start with what you said, it's so important putting on my Ake Arts, which is International Publishers Association. There is the Accessible Books Consortium, which people can Google as well and see. They do trainings in terms of converting the material if the skills don't exist in where you are. But I love this panel. I love the people on the panel. And on that last point about trauma, as somebody from the Caribbean, I feel like that's all we've been exposed to about Africa. As somebody who is a Pan-Africanist and had the privilege of having a mentor who is a Garvey scholar, of course I got to experience Africa from a totally different perspective, but that's not the truth for the majority of us. And so as a publisher, my current agenda is to convert the conversations we're having here into action. And so I wondered, for all the panelists, how do you feel about pursuing projects, even at a very small scale, that shows that whole range and humanity and connection between particularly the Caribbean diaspora and Africa, particularly for children and young people? Because I feel like we've lost a generation, unfortunately, but I feel like a real opportunity exists for children and young people through libraries. So tell me how open you are to that.
Thank you. Can I have Elias start with a response? And I'm thinking specifically here about the African Academic Press.
Yes.
initiative?
Yes, and the answer is yes, 100%. And I think we have to create the bridge. The Caribbean, when I was growing up, when talking about Emperor Haile Selassie was a taboo and a very dangerous exercise, it was the Jamaicans who really put his mantle globally. And through stories, there is a Jamaican scholar who told me things that I didn't know about Ethiopia. Because in the communist Ethiopia that I grew up, it was frowned upon to talk about the royal culture, the royal history. And when every regime comes in our country, what happens is that the most important, the most dangerous thing that existed in that history is their books. So they burn the books. And then a new agenda writes a new story. And most of those stories, it doesn't have anything to do with Ethiopia. It has to do with Russia or something else that we adapt. And by that, we literally killed ourselves. And now we have to reset that and just take it to the next level. So I think the most important thing that we need to do is that Africa lost so much in the past 60 years. As much as we lost in the slavery or in the past colonialism, we are losing a lot from brain drain. So our scholars are not staying in our continent. They leave because of the pull factor and the push factor. We're also to be blamed. And then after we lost them, we lose their content of their brain and their educational. And then how can we bring them back? They're not going to put everything down and come back to us. So what we need to do is to create a bridge so that their stories can be accessed in children's book and then young adult books in a way that without them changing their zip code, we can be able to access their knowledge so that we can be able to teach a new generation of our people to know about our own history and the history of our neighbors and everyone in the continent so that we can be able to at least control or navigate to a better place of the next generation. I think so. It's a very good idea, and we have to do it.
Any other responses?
Yeah, I think yes, definitely, very much so. I wanted to mention, particularly because you spoke about academia. I think for people who don't know African Books Collective, I think it's an important organization to look at because it was founded by Africa-based publishing houses as a way to get their books across and outside the continent. This is in the 80s, which was much, much harder to do than it is now. And I think it's important for people to know about it because that's a lot of scholarly works are found there that were published and written by Africans. You spoke about the Caribbean. We are actually in progress of, we're working on a manuscript, a translation of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Yeah, in Kiswahili, Walter Rodney, yes, Guyana. So it's. I mean, it's.
Can we just have a catalogue of everything you're translating? We need to know.
Yes, definitely. I will. All of these are part of efforts, very, very intentional, deliberate efforts at kind of connecting, different experiences. Something that people don't know actually, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa was first published in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, by Walter Bgoya, incidentally. So yes. But the point is we have to definitely reconvene. I think this is extremely important. And Lola, I just can't thank you enough. I truly can't thank you enough because these conversations, where do we have them? Where they really matter. Where they're a matter of life and death, not even theory or conversation. They're a matter of life and death. Yes, definitely. Collaborations in translation, collaboration. And one thing, if I can make I can sort of throw in there, is I think we also need to look at translations between African languages. not through any, yes, like, you know, and something that we're advocating in, because it's a primarily Bantu language, is Kiswahili being a bridge language, you know, so between two different African languages. I think this is an interesting thing to think about, because a lot is lost actually in translation, you know, when we go through languages that do not have any you know, from us. So I wanted to throw that in there just for thoughts.
Angela, if I may just add just a couple of small things, just jumping off that. Thank you so much for that great question. You know, I discovered when I worked for the AFCFTA in Ghana that Africa, the institutions of Africa, have 4 working languages: English, French, Portuguese, Arabic. But they have as many official languages as there are Africans to speak them. In other words, every African language is an official language of the AU. They're just not working languages. So that's something to think about. The other thing to think about, Latoya, is very disappointing what happened in, I think it was 2012 or 2014, when Haiti applied to join the AU, and they were turned down. I think that's one of the most short-sighted things that our leaders have done, because that recognition that the Caribbean is the diaspora, but it's part of the continent, I think would have taken us very far.
I see 2 hands up, Amma, Datsun, and someone else around the 5th row. So we have 2 questions, and we're going to keep them brief, please.
Good morning. My question is for Elias. You mentioned that you were in exile. I'd like to know why. Thank you.
I was a journalist. I was a journalist in 1990, early 90s, when at that time when the EPRDF government took office. And the government, the then Prime Minister, or President at that time, and then he became Prime Minister, he started saying things. For example, he said that Ethiopia has only 100 years of history. That's one of the first things that blew my mind. The second one was about the flag, which we are very, very proud of. And of course, and that started something in me that I couldn't control. And the way I was going about it was very wrong, and I was saved by 2 friends who gave me another way to solve that issue, which is just to start to write. And journalism saved my life. I wouldn't be alive. And journalism gave me a way to breathe and a way to express my feelings. And so those articles I wrote became the reason that I was in exile, but I was lucky enough to get a job as a journalist immediately in Los Angeles. I became the managing editor of Ethiopian Review magazine, and that gave me totally a new life. So I continued, but it went to a global level. So writing is a very dangerous exercise, and publishing is more so.
Amma?
Yes. So thank you so much. This panel was just so dear to my heart, you know. And when I think about, you know, the history of democratization of knowledge from, you know, the days, printing press was mid-15th century or so, right? Then the internet came in the 20th century to start, you know, just transforming completely the way people access knowledge. And now we've moved on to chat, you know, GPT, AI, the way we interact and explore and discover the knowledge. I just panic when I see that. I don't think that Africa is making initiatives to be part of this technology, infrastructure, platforms, tools. Where are we investing? I just don't see that investment. On the internet, English is the dominant language of the internet. Where are our stories, our voices, our languages on this global platform that is, you know, changing the way we access information? So I'd like to know from you, what are the initiatives that Africa is taking to really build these infrastructure platforms and take advantage of the tools in publishing? You know, Angela, you spoke about Braille. Braille is wonderful for blind people, expensive to produce. Braille paper and the amount of Braille, a Braille book is just a no-go. The University of Ghana, I worked there for many years, and we were trying to make material for undergraduates accessible, right? In the Oxford University, every single book in the undergraduate library in Oxford is accessible. In Ghana, I don't even know if it's. So blind students come to University of Ghana, they only get 5%. In fact, the only materials they get are their textbooks and the books that they use for their work. All the other books in our wonderful BALM library are not accessible. And there are tools here. The internet is there, audio is there, text-to-speech is there. Why aren't we using any of these tools? What is the fear or the hesitation on the part of publishers to embrace technology to boost their publishing everywhere?
Thank you, Amma. I'm going to throw that to the publishers, or Petina as well, as an author. Mkuki.
Actually, there are initiatives. I mean, Amma, you are also one of those people who are making these. For example, at Mkuki Nyota, we are building a digital platform. We'll start with audio. So basically getting our books into audio, getting our books into other digital mediums. And like I'd mentioned earlier, I mean, I think this question of AI is really a question of what goes into these systems. And I think that is something that publishers should take seriously. It's not really it's not just a technological question, but it's really it's very much a content and intellectual an intellectual production question. So even as publishers, we need to start widening the idea of what a publishing house has always been doing. Something that I find to be maybe the challenge of my generation and generation that's coming next. I think the fear has always been in terms of who owns the IP, what will happen to these books when they go into these other medium, and I think we really need to address that, because we can't then all of a sudden start dumping things, so Spotify and all of these other companies sort of use and make profit, and then we don't have any kind of influence into that process. And I think we need to we need to build our own platforms. That's precisely what I'm saying. We need to build our own platforms so that we can own, and really direct, our agenda, as it were. So I think this we must. It's not a choice. We must.
I think something that we have been talking about the last few days maybe comes to this answer. Accessibility for blind specifically, that's an issue to talk about. But accessibility of our books itself is in danger or in challenging. So when we say the word accessibility, if we are talking about blinds, let's talk about blinds. But accessibility in general of books in Africa it's almost non-existent. In the black world, I can say specifically. But the other issue is that, I think our South African sister in one of the panels, she told us that she's quitting from publishing because it was very difficult for her to survive in the environment that South Africa presents to her. And how many writers and how many publishers are challenging, living a very challenging life? All of us are really, we're making a very difficult, a very difficult transition to every year, just trying to continue to publish. So what needs to happen is that the struggle that we're going through has to be lifted with our collaborative work, so that we can create a platform, and a Pan-African platform, so that at least we will share the burden, and also we can be able to seek support from international communities and or our own reading community, so that we can, we can sustain it. Otherwise, if we are going to continue to do this individually, we're dead. And I think so we have to unite, and we have to push together.
That sounds like a great parting shot, and our time is up. Thank you so much for participating in this conversation. It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you about democratizing knowledge production. All the panelists are available to have coffee and conversations with you. And Petina Gappah's book is also available at the Festival Book